Hi, welcome back to Hope 2020. I'm so glad and the whole volunteers and attendees here are very happy to welcome Maggie Mayhem with her session on hackers in a post Roe versus Wade world. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you for coming and being with us today.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. I am so pleased to be here at Hope 2020. I was at Hope 2018, and it was a very important time in my life because right after I got off stage, I found out that I was going to become a parent. There was no way I was going to miss Hope 2020. Come hell, high water, or plague, I had to be here. And it's so funny to be a new parent and to be talking about abortion, but that's how it's going to work, and that's what we're going to do today. Get into my slides. So this is a talk that will be very frank about abortion in all kinds of contexts. So if you are squeamish about medical content or something that can be a little bit more graphic or frank, please understand that this may not be a great talk for you to be in, and take care of yourself. I want everyone to get the most out of this that they can. So I ask my audience to please know themselves. And additionally, abortion is a non-gendered issue. People of all genders have abortions, and people of all genders can know about abortion. There may be some slides that do have some gendered language that may use terms like mother or woman. They do represent part of the population or the demographic of people who have abortions, but not the totality. So if you see that and it doesn't reflect this statement, please know that I'm quoting people and I'm using news articles to the best of my ability. But I do consider abortion to affect people of all different kinds of bodies and backgrounds. Who am I and why am I talking about this? I'm probably a little bit more well known for my work in harm reduction or sex worker rights, but I have been a full spectrum doula and a doula trainer for many years now. I have worked at county hospitals. I have worked with induction termination collectives at the county hospital, providing emotional and practical support to people who are having even up to third trimester abortions. I have helped people who are having medication abortion. I have provided companionship to people who are having in-clinic abortions, as well as birth or any possible outcome of a pregnancy. And it does not go without saying that as a doula, I am a very strong vaccine evangelist. And my birth education is about providing options for people without any particular all-natural agenda. And I'm talking about this subject today because I believe that abortion is information technology. It is a set of tools and skills that affect the conditions of human lives, and it is very relevant to hackers. Lorraine Rothman is one of the co-creators of the Del-M. She and Carol Downer invented an improvised abortion device when abortion was still illegal. They built it in the Los Angeles area of California. They were raided. There's a fantastic, the court case was known as the Great Yogurt Conspiracy because the police conducted the raid at basically the worst time possible. It was when Carol Downer was trying to explain how to treat yeast infections with Greek yogurt. And so all of the police documents are pretty zany and wacky. The court proceedings are pretty wacky. These two activists made the Los Angeles PD look pretty ridiculous. And they would go on to share their experiences. Carol is someone who has definitely influenced my work and is part of why I'm here. But in general, what I've learned is that pregnancy is an InfoSec and OPSEC nightmare. And this is why it's so important for hackers to take a look at what's happening in reproductive rights. And we're going to go into a little bit about why these issues concern hackers in general. For one, we know that we have already a dragnet in place to identify people who are pregnant. We know that companies are looking for this kind of data. There was a famous talk by someone who tried to conceal their pregnancy by using Tor and all kinds of other privacy types of things, and it made them look like a criminal. It just kind of got over the top. Big Data knows that you're pregnant. Another article about this, that our life is an open book. Target found out that someone was pregnant before their father did. And we have to take into account that Google is doing a lot of this deliberately. I don't know if everyone has necessarily heard about how Google was trying to prevent food poisoning for all of us by observing when people were typing in food poisoning symptoms. Google would track that, it would find their location. Oftentimes, it even had enough data to see which restaurants people may have gone to, or if they use their mapping location. There was a lot of comprehensive data. And none of us want food poisoning. You can see why something like this might look like a really good idea. But what Google did is they went on and they notified local food departments and health inspections. So there were a lot of less than random inspections that took place simply because of what people were typing into Google about the symptoms they were having. So if we know that there's already a commercial incentive for all kinds of free software to identify people who are pregnant, and as quickly as possible, oftentimes before someone might even know that they're pregnant, just based on what they're reporting. And we know that some of these companies will collaborate with law enforcement. There is something of a problem here. And in fact, it's a growing problem because the more and more we talk about abortion in the news, the more and more people are searching it. All of these trends are just popping up. Abortion, self-managed abortion, all of these related search terms are growing in popularity. And when some researchers studied them, they looked at it very closely to see what do these trends mean? What do people need? What are they lacking? What can be done? They found a very interesting trend, and that is that the communities that had the least sexual and reproductive health resources produced the highest number of searches for contraceptive and abortion information. In other words, if you came from a community where you knew where your nearest abortion clinic was, you never needed to search for it in the first place. If you knew how to access contraception, you don't have to look for it. The people who had these resources ambiently in their community or discussed by teachers or trusted adults and community members don't have to actually type something into Google that can be documented or tracked. You're at an advantage if your community has this resources and this information. If you are far away from a nearby abortion clinic, if you did not get sex ed, if you don't know where to begin and you're just trying to figure out what to do with your body as it is right now, you are the one who's most likely basically to implicate yourself. More than that, let's say you're not even looking for information. Let's say, you're just kind of using some software that's popular. For instance, we have a lot of fertility trackers and period trackers. Well, as it turns out, all of these period trackers are spying on you, whether you enter anything into Google by yourself or not. Menstrual apps are definitely selling data. A lot of different people have been doing talks and research and essays about this. All of these types of things that are in our phone are potentially vulnerable. They're vulnerable because it's a bunch of data that can be hacked or leaked. They're vulnerable because it can be packaged and sold to somebody. But moreover, a lot of these apps are taking a lot of very personal and unique identifying information. Some of them are linked immediately to thermometers, which can track when somebody is already ovulating. Which means that there is potentially a window into someone's fertility and someone's conception. If someone is already using an app like this, they may already be documenting when they became pregnant, and they may not realize that that information can be viewed by other people. So as I said before, you may already be implicating yourself and others long before you've committed a crime. But abortion's legal. How can this possibly be a crime? We have Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade is still standing. There shouldn't be a crime in place here. That's not why we had this kind of a court ruling, or so it would seem. It has always been part of the agenda to ultimately overturn Roe v. Wade and to have legal penalties for people who obtain illegal abortions. This was what Vice President George Bush said in 1988, and we are seeing it come to fruition. If you want to find out how many people are experiencing criminalization for self-induced abortion, you can just get right on Google right now. There are a lot of people who are being incarcerated because they have ordered abortion drugs, because they did try to perform an abortion and they were found out. And we're going to look at some of those stories. How an online search for abortion pills landed this woman in jail. Charged with murder after taking an abortion pill. Remember, abortion is already legal. So if you take a pill to have an abortion, but you don't do it in the proper clinical context, now it could suddenly become a murder. The Nation has covered this. This goes back to 2015. I could go on and on. There is a fantastic organization that I cannot speak more highly about, and they are the National Advocates for Pregnant Women. Their slogan is, if you're locked up because you're knocked up, call. And naturally, you know, I really care about what they're doing. And they have compiled numerous cases where people are facing charges, where their digital footprints are being examined, where they are at risk simply because they tried to express their reproductive rights. Moreover, here's another thing that can make this an information or an operational security nightmare is that there are fake clinics that are out there, a growing number of them, and they are taking up a lot of taxpayer money. And so what that means is right now our United States government is helping to fund fraudulent clinics. These are places that look like a reproductive health clinic. They have a name, they're in the phone book, they might even be located in the same shopping complex as a real clinic would be, and they are actively trying to deceive people. And some of the things that they will do are a little bit more perhaps mercenary. In this case, we did find a fake clinic that was taking patient information, people who thought they were patients who were giving up their name, their date of birth, a lot of medical information. And because they're a fake clinic, they are not subject to HIPAA or any privacy regulations. They do share that information. And they actually started trying to fax and email local abortion clinics with a fake contract that said that someone had been coerced into signing with the hopes that if they went to have an abortion, the clinic would not honor their request for an abortion because this was sent to them. So a lot of deception. And it can be hard to advertise yourself as a clinic or to try to work around someone who's behaving this way, especially when they are so well supported. Providers are facing an increased amount of violence. The 90s were a very violent time for abortion clinics. There were a lot of bombings, there were murders, there were assassinations. It really did start to cool down under the Obama years. With the election of Donald Trump, the amount of violence that clinics were facing started to sharply increase. And some of these numbers are quite scary to see, that we can see attempted murders, the vandalism, the bomb threats, the picketing. Many abortion providers actually have to move around. Many do not even reside in the state where they practice. They will fly in when they go to work. They have to do a lot of operational security just to exist. And this can be very difficult for someone who is trying to access an abortion to have to navigate around. So first and foremost, you have to cover your tracks. You have to make sure that what you're doing is top secret. You have to make sure you're going to a real clinic, that they're not going to give your information away. And you might have to run the gauntlet of potential actualized violence. Abortion clinics usually have metal detectors outside of their doors. They have escorts. They have people ready. They have a lot of security, and they might have to shut down at a moment's notice. There are times when I have done shifts in abortion clinics where when something has become threatening, we simply have to clear the appointments for the day. We have to go into a lockdown procedure. So knowing that just accessing healthcare can get you arrested or get you killed can be a significant deterrent in terms of expressing your reproductive rights. And so what does this lead to? It leads to a lot of people who are looking for different options. Since right now, legal abortion may not be adequate, people might have to look outside of legal. And self-induced abortions searches are on the rise, and people are looking for self-managed abortion. But that can be a really scary thing to hear. Self-managed abortion, isn't that a back alley abortion? Isn't that the wire hanger that we're also afraid of? Isn't that what we're trying to avoid? But it just may be that self-managed abortion is the solution we need until we can actually secure legal rights. And I'm going to reassure you on why it might be okay. This is a news clipping, and it looks a lot older than it is, but it's actually from 1984, and it's from Westchester. So this is from a case in New York. And in this case, in 1984, with legal abortion, probably with more clinics than there are today, there was still someone who was having an illegal abortion. And this is the story that I think we think about when we think about self-managed abortion, in that this young woman was 20 years old. She was quite late into her pregnancy. She was about 8.5 months. She used an anesthetic from the dental clinic where she worked, and she used a scalpel, and she basically attempted a cesarean on herself. We don't want that. We do not want that. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about self-managed abortion. And at that trial, one of the attorneys read another example of what we're afraid of the fear of inserting something into the cervix to induce an abortion. We don't want that either. That's not what self-managed abortion should look like. That's what unsafe abortion looks like. Abortion itself is one of the safest medical procedures that you can have, whether it's in clinic or out of clinic, actually. It has a very low number of risks, certainly a fraction of which you would be facing for a full-term pregnancy, labor and delivery, certainly. Labor and delivery are very risky. Labor and delivery do claim lives. Abortion, not so much. We're looking really 1 in 100,000 with serious effects. So there is a low threshold here if we have a safe environment and we have knowledgeable people and we have people who have a little bit of an educational background, that they are not forced to do things like use dental anesthetic and a scalpel or use a knitting needle. It's the conditions of criminalization and secrecy that make illegal abortion dangerous. It's not actually the act of terminating a pregnancy. We do have other tools. What we need to do is prevent unsafe abortions. Now, the most simple way that this is happening right now, the way most underground abortion in America is operating, is with medication abortion. It's with mifepristone and misoprostol. These are two very, very, very safe medications. Tylenol is infinitely riskier than either of these. Mifepristone, it was originally known as RU-486. If there's anyone who's kind of old like me, you might remember when RU-486 hit the market, and it was a very big deal. What it does is it blocks progesterone, and that will stop the development of a pregnancy. It will not be able to develop anymore. And then misoprostol is a medication that will start contractions and cause the uterus to expel its contents. Misoprostol is for ulcers and it's for abortions, and that is all it does. In fact, misoprostol is so good with ulcers for all mammals that it is a 100% legitimate veterinary purpose to have if your horse gets ulcers. If you had 100 boxes of misoprostol in your backpack and someone stopped you and they said, "What are you doing with all of this? Isn't that an illegal drug?" You could say, all my horses have ulcers, and that would be true. Probably hamsters too. That is all it does. And its use was discovered by low-income, mostly rural Brazilian women. This was not discovered by doctors. This was not found out by nurses or anyone in the professional community, or even anyone in the United States or Europe. It was people who were working with animals quite a bit and having to take care of them, and eventually noticing that the label on the box made it very clear not to take it during pregnancy under any circumstances because it will cause a pregnancy to end. And for a lot of those individuals, that side effect was a feature and not a bug. So eventually it was discovered by a lot of the medical professionals in Brazil. It spread from Brazil outwards, and now it's becoming a commonplace way for safe abortion to occur. So when we take away the scare stories, when we take away the scalpels, when we take away the knitting needles, what are we really talking about in terms of risk? Well, we know that a small percentage of medication abortion will require a surgical follow-up because it's incomplete. There may be some complications, but again, they are very rare. We're looking at more like 1 in 100,000 for really severe side effects or complications. We're worried about the digital footprint somebody might have if they are trying to obtain misoprostol online. We have to worry about the vendors. Are these vendors going to have good information security practices? Are they going to be easily hackable? Are there going to be databases of customers that are at risk? Or will these vendors even be legitimate at all? There is going to be fake misoprostol. There's just going to be cheap cheap varieties that aren't going to be very effective, or the dosing is going to be inadequate. So we need to make sure we have quality drugs that are available. Someone can buy something online, but it doesn't mean they know how to use it. How much should you take? How do you know when you've taken enough? What is the timing? Online vendors don't always have 24/7 drug support. So that could be a problem. It might also be a little bit difficult to do that emotionally if you're keeping a big secret like this. If you've kept a pregnancy a secret and now you're getting an illegal abortion secretly, and now you're going to go through the process of a medication abortion by yourself, that could be hard to do alone. But we do know that mifepristone and misoprostol are 99% effective when taken together, and we know that misoprostol alone is 85 to 90% effective. Those are very good numbers. They're certainly worth having a structure around this, but we know that 99 is not 100, and we know that 85 to 90 is certainly not 100. So there may be people who have incomplete abortions who need to get medical care after they have tried this. In the event there is an incomplete abortion, it's very key to remember that there is no diagnostic test whatsoever that can differentiate an intentionally induced abortion from a spontaneous one or a miscarriage. The only way that someone can actually be charged or found guilty of this is if they confess at a hospital, if they tell a doctor that they ordered medication from the internet illegally and this is what happened. If a doctor is concerned that it was an illegal abortion, such as in the case of Purvi Patel, they can call the police. When Purvi Patel went to get help after a self-induced abortion, the hospital was very worried. They did send police to Purvi's house. They searched the house. They emptied the trash cans to get any type of wrapper or anything they could to pursue a criminal trial. And that case is definitely worth looking at. It was a very complicated one that would have set a very bad precedent. Luckily, that resolved itself, but it does indicate the situation that we have with law enforcement and hospitals. Nevertheless, for whoever this may help today, there is no test that can determine this. All that anyone needs to say if they get any help at a hospital after they have taken medication for an abortion is that they believe they're experiencing a miscarriage, because the treatment will be the exact same, whether it's for an induced abortion or for a spontaneous miscarriage. The way the doctors will respond will be the same. It doesn't matter which way. So people can take care of themselves if they can remember that fact. This medication should be pretty easy to get out. We're in the middle of a pandemic. A lot of people are using telemedicine in all kinds of ways, but unfortunately, we cannot have telemedicine for abortion medication. It's not possible right now for a doctor to prescribe this over the phone or over video chat if it was the appropriate option for somebody. We still require that these medications be dispensed at doctors' offices and that there be registration with a distributor so we can know who has it and how much they have, which is another form of surveillance that focuses only on reproductive health care providers. But it is happening. There is an underground network. There has always been a network of underground abortion. If you want to look at some more of that, these are two very good books that I recommend checking out, The Story of Jane and The Abortionist, which both make a very compelling case that even in the absence of something as safe as medication abortion, illegal abortions were performed safely. Some of the things that would go wrong would be providers who were trying to exchange sexual favors for access to abortion, or extortion or blackmail. That was definitely a set of conditions that were difficult. Doctors were afraid of their own patients. So in order to obtain an illegal abortion in the 60s, it may have been necessary to be blindfolded and never actually get to meet your doctor. But we do know that there were probably upwards to 1.2 million illegal abortions per year in the United States prior to Roe v. Wade. And very, very few of them actually had the shock capacity of the back alley abortion. That was fewer cases. It was really necessary to talk about those. We had to create a fear of back alley and illegal abortion in order to pursue Roe v. Wade, but it wasn't always necessarily as honest as it was politically advantageous to talk about it the way we did. The way that they did that prior to medication abortion was to build what they called the Del-M, which I'm now going to show you. The Del-M is an improvised abortion device, and it was based completely off of what doctors at the time would have been using, which would have been either a manual vacuum aspiration device or an electric vacuum aspiration device. As people who were helping the underground network were watching them, they eventually realized that abortion itself wasn't maybe as complicated as they thought it had to be. It looked like a pretty simple procedure. The equipment looked simple, and they improvised it. That's what Carol Downer and Lorraine did, is they found a way to improvise it and get that technology and skills into the hands of pretty inexperienced people who were able to do this safely. And there are still people who are using Del-Ms right now in the United States. You can find this, you can find activists who are providing care using these. They're cool people. However, the Del-M as an improvised device is really only actually more efficient in the hands of minimally trained people who are working together in a group. And I find that to be a very interesting thing, because the actual manual vacuum aspiration device is very strong. It's very quick. In the hands of a skilled provider, this will be just as effective as an electric pump. It can be used in a low resource area, and it takes maybe 5 minutes to complete an abortion with it. This is going to take you probably more like 30 minutes. It's going to take a lot longer. It's going to go slower. It doesn't have the same amount of suction. It's probably being used by people who don't have the same kind of familiarity to do 10 tasks at once. In order to use the full equipment, you'd have to know how to open the cervix, to dilate it, to get a cannula into the right place, to get the cannula supported by the right kind of equipment in the right place, create the suction, and actually create the uterine evacuation. By making a Del-M, instead of having a single skilled operator, you could break this down into 3 semi-skilled operators. There could be one person whose sole job was to learn about how to get a cannula into a cervix properly and safely. There would be one person who could actually learn and operate the suction necessary. There could be somebody who was there to comfort the person who was having the abortion. They made it a team effort, and it's less efficient. But on the other hand, it's more efficient because you don't need people who have had 4 years of medical training to do it. You can have a group of people who are each exceptionally skilled at one very simple task. And that's how things were happening for a while. Nevertheless, there's still people who are teaching low resource people how to use these. IPAS itself, the manufacturer of this abortion device, will send you a guide on how to use it. They'll teach people how to use it, making the basic assumption that there is some amount of medical training as a whole, even if there has not been specific abortion training. But in general, it's still being taught to people who may not have a full range of expertise the way we would expect for other medical procedures. And as medication becomes more available, though, it's probably going to be the default. We have a smaller number of abortions per year, although pretty much on close to what it would be in the United States if abortion were illegal. More of them are medication. Still having a lot of hostile circumstances, more hostility. But we're teaching people how to do this with lower qualifications. In California right now, it no longer requires a medical doctor to perform an abortion. Nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, and other people who don't have that full MD are legally able to provide abortions, and that's a necessary way to meet need. We also have ambassadors, people who are training and learning how to talk about medication abortion, who are not necessarily doctors, but know how to talk someone through it. If you wanted to be involved with this, you could get in touch with Plan C, and they would teach you how medication abortion works, how the dosing works, and how to be a good source of information for people in your community and to dispel misinformation about medication. Women on Waves is an organization that is dealing with the hostile abortion climate around the globe by getting abortion pills to people anywhere they are. They have done this in all kinds of ways, either having boats in international waters where people could come out and therefore they would not be subject to any kind of laws. They had abortion drones that would fly overhead and drop medication down to people. And one of my favorites is they did an abortion robot that could go out and get medication to people as necessary. And then anyone who got those pills could get in touch with somebody who could tell them how to use it and walk them through the process. In this big, long run of what's going on in terms of surveillance and what's going on in terms of access, does it really have anything to do with hackers? And I would say it absolutely does, because we need to continue to promote encryption, digital privacy, and information security. And we need to understand that there are certain groups of people who need this really, really desperately. They don't even know they need it yet. They don't even need to know they need to start protecting what they're talking about online. You need to know that maybe you should not Google your pregnancy symptoms until you're really certain what you might do if you were to find out that you were pregnant. We need these communities to get this information. We need abortion providers to have people to continue to help them with their encryption and their digital security, because they are constantly subject to any number of attacks. They are very vulnerable. We need to continue learning about how this material creates a precedent for surveillance of any type of medical doctor. There's a lot I could say about that. I'm going to move on with that to the next point. We need to continue to build coalition with people who facilitate access to abortion. Right now, we have a lot of people who work in abortion. We have a lot of people who work in InfoSec, and not necessarily as much crossover as there should be to communicate about what needs to be done to protect people providing underground abortion. It's important to learn about the history of abortion beyond legislation. We have a narrative that abortion was made illegal and that was bad. It happened in the 1800s, and then it got worse because there was no legal abortion, and so everybody died constantly. They were always dying. It was very bad. And then lawyers came and they made Roe v. Wade happen, and then abortion was legal and everything was fine until Trump. And that's really not the whole story. There were people who were facilitating illegal and underground abortion who were medical doctors. There were people who were facilitating underground abortion who were lay people who knew nothing about it. Both were able to do so safely. Predatory people were very predatory in the context of illegal abortion. The more illegal it is, the more predatory people we will see come out. When abortion is under attack, we need to recognize that it's a form of information technology that is under attack, and all forms of information technology should be protected and they should be accessible to people as much as possible. If we have doctors who are being surveilled, they are not going to learn how to provide abortion. If they're under that risk of being watched, they're simply not going to provide this form of healthcare. And it's also simply unfair if people who are accessing reproductive health care in this one form take a legal risk that people who are accessing any other form of health care would not face. I will be doing a workshop later this evening. If you would like to learn how to build a DEL-M, please stay tuned. I have a workshop that will be coming up. I'm going to walk you through how to do this yourself. That will be a whole lot of fun. And beyond that, thank you so much for listening. I hope I can answer any questions that you might have right now. I love talking to people. Let's open it up.
All right. Thank you very much, Maggie. That was a great talk about all the different things going on for women to be careful about in protecting their privacy and information. So thank you for sharing that with us. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm looking for some chat.
Okay, so actually, I have a couple of questions I'll read to you that came from the chat. The first one was, couldn't your blood be tested for RU486 to determine whether or not you self-induced an abortion?
Mm-hmm. Because what we're working with many times are synthetic hormones and prostaglandins, they are not necessarily going to come up in a similar way. You may not be able to determine if insulin came from a synthetic form or if it was being made by the body.
Right, exactly. Okay, thank you. And then there was a question about your earrings and IUDs. I don't know if you saw that. That was a funny question. All right.
Oh, I
Um,
wish.
yes. Next question I have for you. Would you agree that all religious anti-abortion arguments are actually control arguments?
Yes, I would agree that they are. And it's interesting because I'm talking about surveillance, and surveillance is the real reason why we have the abortion climate that we do right now. Prior to the invention of the sonogram, there were very few religious prohibitions against abortion. In the Catholic faith, the fetus or the infant was not considered to even possess a soul until the first movement could be felt. And in my own pregnancy, I did not feel the first movement of my baby until I was 18 weeks along. So, as a good Catholic, technically, I would not be a sinner if I had had an abortion prior to feeling that movement. In the Protestant faith, there was very similar ideas about that. There really wasn't a lot of religious objections to abortion, partly due to the fact that it wasn't visible. Without a sonogram, you really can't see a pregnancy until it's much further along. And in general, spontaneous miscarriage is so common. It's such a frequent experience that I think there was also just a general sense that until something is further along or actually in your arms, you don't want to count your chickens before they're hatched. And so knowing that nature can be cruel, there really just wasn't the objection to it. When we start to get the sonogram and we can see and we can visualize the fetus as basically an individual inside the body that's gestating it, that changed things quite a bit. And there was a very concerted political effort to use anti-abortion sentiment to help pursue other agendas. But I don't think we would be where we were if people couldn't look and see it. And that's where the control really starts. And that's where we divided the idea that there's like two people who have competing interests. There's a very, very bad pregnant person or a mother who has to be watched because they are not necessarily trustworthy in taking care of this separate individual that maybe we as society or a religion or a culture would do.
Understood. Thank you. All right, our next question is the Dell M a medical device or can anyone buy it?
The Dell M is not actually a medical device. The Dell M is an improvised device, but a manual vacuum aspirator is a medical device and you can buy it. I actually bought mine on Amazon. You can't buy them on Amazon anymore, unfortunately. If you go on Alibaba, if you go on eBay, you can absolutely buy a 100% legit manual vacuum aspirator, just like the one I have right here. There is no need to really build anything like this unless you were doing self-help circles or you wanted to understand it, or you even want to understand just the nature of the simplicity of this technology. The fact that we have thousands of laws, we have thousands of laws governing who can use basically a jar with tubes or a vacuum device that is this simple. And it is simply disproportionate to the level of technology and skill necessary. So I think it's a cool thing to build it because you can see how simple it is. And then when you look at the laws and you look at the political reaction, they just don't square up. They just don't square up. You run a higher risk of complications from piercing somebody's ears in your bathroom, quite frankly, because you really are kind of crossing some more blood barriers in many ways. So I would say it's like, if you have an understanding of basic safety, it's really possible.
Thank you. All right, our next question is, do states have any different laws that might address Del M and RU 46, just like access to abortion varies in different states?
Yes. I should say, if you're using this and you put this in someone's body, you're committing a crime in all the states. This is a completely illegal device for anything other than making it. If you are making it for fun, for decoration, totally legal. If you put this in someone's body, you are now practicing medicine without a license. In all the states, if you are not a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant or a doctor who is actually legally hired to provide it, you can't do it on your, off hours. It would be legal, but different states will regulate when and how you could use it. And as far as medication, there are a lot of different laws about how long into a pregnancy they might be legal, or what the procedure is for accessing them. Some might require the same 72-hour waiting period. Some might just have a one-day, like, drop into the clinic and go pretty quickly. Some states might require more or less invasive testing prior to taking medication abortion. So they do all have a very different set of laws. In fact, I think the one, yeah, it's another slide that's gone. I had another slide about the relative hostility that I would say, if you could go back in the talk to look at, where you can see how our country has shifted. And we used to have kind of just murky, similar, kind of homogenous laws. And here we are at 2020, and now it's very coastally different. The majority of abortion providers in the country right now are in California and New York. If you're in California, you have the most progressive abortion laws in the entire country. The last legal abortion will probably be performed at, like, SF General or UCSF or UC Davis. Those they are going to be doing this until they can't anymore. If you're in Texas, if you're in Georgia, if you're in Alabama, you're in trouble. We have some states that only have a few clinics or a few providers at all. So it's a rapidly changing landscape, and very different depending on where you are.
It's true. Very challenging for people that need that service, for sure. All right, next question is, abortion is a very difficult subject for many people. Do you have any advice on how to make opening up on this subject easier to talk about?
One of the things that made a big difference in getting Roe v. Wade passed was the sheer number of people who knew someone in their life who had an abortion. And so I think one of the first ways that we can start a conversation is to be the kind of people that someone would confide in. And that's like a whole self-help kind of lifestyle thing, but we all know someone who's had an abortion. And if no one in your life has ever told you that, they may not feel safe sharing that kind of information. And so there's maybe not a button or a pin or anything you can do to say, tell me about your abortion, but there are a lot of ways that we can be compassionate and empathetic in our conversation, or considerate in the ways that we talk about it when we see it in the news. If you see a news story and you make it very clear that you're someone who believes that access to reproductive health professionals is important and should be protected, you're making it clear that you would support someone who needed to get that kind of healthcare. So that's like the setting up a foundation. The other way that we can talk about it is there are groups of people who are trying to do so in small groups. Shout Your Abortion is an organization where people who have had an abortion can get together and talk about it. And when they do so in a sympathetic room with other people who are familiar, they can practice what it is to talk about it, to see what it's like to say it out loud, before, maybe doing it in mixed company, or among other types of groups. Even though it can be a hard topic, though, I think we can look at the types of restrictions and the impacts they have on people's life and point to that, because that's when we got Roe v. Wade. People simply stopped accepting the idea that there should be negative consequences for someone who really needed to access that kind of health care. And it's weird because here it is. I don't think anyone who would get an abortion would say that they are committing an act of civil disobedience. But they are, in effect, committing an act of civil disobedience, even if abortion is legal, because we live in a climate where there is so much misinformation, there is so much hostility, there is so much fear, that someone who takes those risks and does that is committing civil disobedience. And we don't think of it that way. but it makes it possible for me to say anyone who gets an abortion is brave. And that kind of bravery always has my respect. But those stories and that knowledge are why the majority of Americans support access to abortion. We do not live in a country where people think that it should be criminal or illegal. We do not live in a country where people think that Roe v. Wade should go. We live in a country where people want to see it remain. And so know that even if it feels scary or edgy, odds are likely that you're talking to someone who agrees that it should remain legal, and that you're talking to someone who agrees that it's a form of healthcare that anyone who needs it should be able to have.
Understood. Thank you. And I really feel that Roe versus Wade is such an ingrained part of our society. I don't feel that there could be a reason to overturn it. All right, let's go on to the next one. Hope has a lot of makers and people involved in device design and 3D printing. For example, the talk prior to yours was about groups making personal protective equipment during the era of COVID-19. The question is, might there be a role for makers to play in helping making devices like the Dell M available? Or the vacuum,
yes.
maybe.
Yeah, I would say probably like the Dell M, if this is a catchphrase for, you know, any form of improvised device, this wouldn't necessarily be worth mass manufacturing simply because its efficacy is so low. It's good for groups of people who want to learn. I'll be talking a lot more about how it was used for that. But as far as something like an actual manual vacuum aspirator, holy cow, these things could absolutely be 3D printed. There is nothing about this that is not 3D printable. You know, I can completely break this down and show you. All these pieces are really easy. And frankly, they're better off being used once. There are places and people who are going to use something plastic like this perhaps multiple times with different cannulae. People are using equipment unnecessarily, or, you know, they may not necessarily be able to access as many as they have. There may be one very skilled provider in an area. If you have one person who really knows what they're doing, they're a medical doctor, they know this kind of healthcare inside and out, they may not be able to get as many of these as they need, or if they buy them, they're going to wind up on a watch list. Why do you have all of these? Things like that. So doing any type of manufacturing in a different way that limits that type of liability and gets it into the hands of the right people, I'm really into that. You know, the Dell M is in many ways, it's an intellectual exercise. It's an act of intellectual solidarity. This gets stuff done real fast, especially in the hands of a doctor or a nurse practitioner or someone who's done it 100 times. But the people who have done it 100 times are sometimes the last people possible who should be doing anything to put them on the radar for doing anything that may not be 100% legal. So they need people who are willing to be their little helpers on the side who can take different risks that they can't.
Understood. Thank you very much for that answer. Okay, we're almost out of time. We have 2 minutes left. I've got one more question for you. Given that it is likely that for many women, abortion is chosen because they cannot afford the child, what reasons are there to not make financial help available to help with that category of women avoid the abortion?
Yeah, I agree. Choice is not an even playing field. Choice is not an even playing field, and it is a tragedy when someone wants to have a child and they decide that they can't for something as simple as money. That's a loss. That is a horrible loss, and we should 100% make sure that we have financial help and resources available for anyone who wants to have a child or continue a pregnancy to term. Parenting, adoption, or parenting, those are options for what to do with a child who's here. Adoption is not a way to, you can't offload pregnancy the same way you can parenting. And so for someone who simply does not want to be pregnant, adoption is not going to be an option, or financial resources may not solve their problem if they simply do not want to be pregnant. Until the day that we have artificial wombs or we can move something like that over, someone can simply say, I don't want this pregnancy, and it has nothing to do with the parenting.
Understood. Thank you. That was a very good answer. Let me follow. We're going to wrap this up now. We're out of time. I've got one last question. Can you suggest some things that attendees or viewers can read, watch, or follow up to keep informed of developments in the post Roe versus Wade, Roe versus Wade world?
Yes. Robin Marty is an author I like very much, who has actually written books about a post-Roe America and what that will look like as these restrictions get heavier. And in many ways, what Robin is trying to convey in part of that book is that right now we still have legal abortion under Roe v. Wade, but we have such limited access that we have de facto criminalization. If you don't have an abortion clinic in your state, it's just as available as it was if it were criminal in many regards. And we know that 90% of all counties in America lack an abortion provider. So 90% of all of our counties do not have a provider. About 33% of metropolitan counties do have a provider. So it's important to follow that and see that we might still have Roe v. Wade protected, but we might not have any access, even if the law is on the books. So follow Robin Marty. Follow Robin Marty all the way. Sister Song is another organization that is a group of predominantly women and transgender, non-conforming, non-binary people who founded the idea of reproductive justice instead of reproductive rights. And I think the reproductive justice framework is extremely important, especially now. Reproductive justice says it's not just about the choice for abortion or not, it's about the right to raise a child in a safe world. It's about the right to raise a child free from brutality or police violence, economic uncertainty, housing instability, all of those really important components that go beyond, yes or no for abortion for any individual. So please check out Sister Song. Please check out Robin Marty. And I also referenced some of the other books in my talk that I think are important to read about the history of underground abortion and where we'll be going.
Yes, and your workshop is coming up in just about a half an hour, so hopefully all the attendees will have a chance to go check that out. On behalf of everybody here at Hope 2020, the attendees, the volunteers, we really want to thank you very much for coming and sharing your perspective on this important topic. Thank you very much, Maggie Mayhem.
All right, live long and prosper, Hope.
All right, prosper. All right, take care. All right, thanks. Back to the broadcast team. Forrest, take it away, please.